Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.
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 Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast with me, Dr. Janine Anderson. Heads up, this show may contain adult language and may mention specific foods. If you find either of those to be too triggering, I trust you to take care of yourself and do what you need to do. This podcast is sponsored by IDI Care. IDI Care has provided PHP, IOP, and outpatient treatment for all genders 18 and over since 2001. CAMSA, which stands for Connection, Acceptance, Mindfulness, Sense of Self, and Action, is IDI Care's mindfulness-based treatment approach and is incorporated into each individualized treatment plan. Facilities are located in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Kansas City, and all treatment is supported by master's level clinicians or higher. IDI Care offers 4 specialty tracks for binge eating disorder, elite athletes, substance use, and trauma. And the Connections House, an affordable supportive housing component, adds an extra layer of supervised support. Visit eatingdisorder.care or call 866-771-0861. Well, hey everyone. Welcome to Season 6 of the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast, and isn't that amazing? I'm so excited to be back for another season. I have some really, really wonderful guests who I'm, of course, incredibly grateful to for taking the time to come on the podcast and speak with everyone. Before we get into this episode with Elyse Resch, who's just amazing as usual, I wanted to make a couple of announcements. So one, if you're not following me on social media on either my Facebook author page or on my Instagram, then I would suggest that you do that if you want to keep in touch about real-time announcements and what's going on for me. That is primarily how I update everything. Otherwise, it's kind of difficult to do that on the podcast because I record at different times than the episode is released. So I do have a second book coming out. Some of you are aware of that and have been very kindly emailing me, hey, when's that coming out? It is coming out sometime spring of 2019. I do not have an exact release date yet, and that's because I want to release the Audible audiobook version of that at the same time that I drop the print version and ebook version of it as well. So I'm still getting timing worked out with that, but my hope is to have it out sometime spring 2019. Or potentially early summer 2019 if it has to get pushed back a little bit. But again, definitely follow me on Instagram or follow my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Dr. Anderson Author if you want to be updated on the real-time updates of what's going on. The book is called Meditations for Eating Disorder Recovery. And if you've read my first book, Recover Your Perspective, this book is a follow-up companion book to that. You don't have to have read the first one, but the first one is a much deeper dive. The second one, Meditations for Eating Disorder Recovery, gives you a really brief summary of each of the concepts that I talked about in my first book, and it has a guided meditation that goes along with every single concept. So, especially if you're interested in the audiobook, that might be really helpful to you. If you want to hear me do the guided meditation, you want to do it with me. That's mostly what the audiobook will be. I read a little bit of the summary of the concept, and then you hear the guided meditation activity itself, and then there's a conclusion before it moves on to the next concept and guided meditation activity. So again, that will be coming out on Audible sometime in spring 2019 is the goal. I do not have a release date as of the day of this recording, so follow me on social if you want to stay up to date about that. I will try to update you as podcast episodes come out too, pending I can work it in there correctly in terms of when the episode's sent off to my editor and then when the book is coming out. But I will try to keep you all posted, but stay connected on social media if you really want to stay up to date about that. Anyway, I just wanted to pop on here and share a little bit about the book that's coming out and let you know how you could stay in touch. And let's get into the episode. Elyse Resch, MS, RDN, CEDRD-S, F.IDEP, FADA, FAND, is a nutrition therapist in private practice in Beverly Hills with over 36 years of experience, specializing in eating disorders, intuitive eating, and health at every size. She is the co-author of Intuitive Eating and the Intuitive Eating Workbook for Teens, chapter contributor to the Handbook of Positive Body Image and Embodiment, and has published journal articles, print articles, and blog posts. She also does regular speaking engagements, podcasts, and extensive media interviews. Her work has been profiled on CNN, KABC, NBC, KTTV, The Associated Press, KFI Radio, USA Today, and The Huffington Post, among others. Resch is nationally known for her work in helping patients break free from the diet mentality through the intuitive eating process. Her philosophy embraces the goal of developing body positivity and reconnecting with one's internal wisdom about eating. She supervises and trains health professionals, is a certified eating disorder registered dietitian, a fellow of the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals, and a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Please help me welcome Elyse Resch. Welcome, Elyse. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you back. Oh my gosh, and to talk about your new workbook. So first, tell us about your new workbook.
Well, I am talking about excitement. I just can't wait. I keep looking every day to see if it's going to show up in the mail. My birthday's next week, and I thought maybe I'll get it for my birthday.
Oh.
It's actually officially coming out April 1st, but apparently it's in the warehouse as we speak, and they're starting to send them out. So
that's so exciting.
It's geared mainly toward adolescents, anywhere from probably the age of around 11 to 30, because I think we're adolescents through that. But I actually like to look at it as it's for the teen in each of us, because I think so much of my work is about honoring that inner child in us, including the inner teen, that actually is what often directs our eating and our emotions in our life. And so I think a lot of adult people are going to enjoy this book. It's written in teen language, but I think it's going to appeal to a lot of people. So it's intuitive eating, but written in a little bit different way. I've renamed, the chapters are not Principle 1, Principle 2, as they are in the Intuitive Eating book. I've renamed them, and they're kind of scattered throughout, not in the same order as well. So, I mean, I do refer to the intuitive eating principles, but I don't name the chapters.
Yes. And you were kind enough to send along an advance copy that I was able to read, and I loved it. So I think obviously it's an amazing resource for intuitive eating for teens, but I had that same takeaway that, and I think I even wrote this back in my endorsement, that people beyond the teen years for sure are going to get a lot out of the workbook. And I really like how it's structured. The materials just really, there was a lot of stuff that felt new, even though this is what I do and this is how I eat myself. So I'm so excited to dive into that today. I don't know if you want to start with the first thing, which is I feel like we always have to start, and this is probably endlessly frustrating for you and Evelyn, of what is intuitive eating and what is it not?
Okay. And I think it's a really important question because, unfortunately, there are a lot of people now in the world, not necessarily trained by Evelyn and me, who say they're intuitive eating counselors, and they're using intuitive eating as a structured plan for weight loss. And that is not what intuitive eating is at all. And if they're not using it for that purpose, they're still looking at it in very black and white ways. And I was just on a session with a client talking about black and white thinking and how dangerous it is for us. So that's what intuitive eating isn't. What intuitive eating is a way to tap into that internal wisdom that the majority of people are born with. Just really knowing when we're hungry, when we're full, what foods are really appealing and satisfying to us, without the good and bad connotations that our culture puts on them. And when I say tap back into it, I'm saying that we can find that intuitive eater in us. But for so many people, that connection's been lost because of diet culture, because of the whole concept of being thinner, being better, which is so just, really dangerous and
prejudiced
and stigmatized, and something that it's the last ism. So many people are so they won't say some things that they know they shouldn't say about many other aspects of life, but they still think they can call out people on their weight and associate it with health. That's the way they do it. They'll go, well, but of course that person has to lose weight so that they'll be healthier. Well, that's not correct.
Yeah.
And it's very stigmatizing. So in any case, I really believe that we can find our way back to that natural place that we had when we were little. Most people are pulled away from it by so many things besides what we just talked about. So intuitive eating is tapping into actually the three parts of the brain. I always like to remind people that intuitive eating isn't just about your tongue. It's not just about just eat what you want without regard for how your body feels. I think I may have talked about this the last time we talked, but I think it's always
Say it again.
Okay. So back when there were dinosaurs, that was the reptilian era, and the dinosaurs had only one function in their brain, and that was to survive. So it was called the reptilian brain, which is what drove them to eat smaller dinosaurs to stay alive. They didn't have the ability to feel or think. They weren't scared to eat or thinking, oh, this is bad. This is a bad food dinosaur. I shouldn't eat it. They just went for it. And then as we evolved into mammals, there was another layer of brain functioning that developed, which actually sits on top of the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain's kind of right in the back above the brainstem, and this part of the brain sits on top of it, and it's called the mammalian brain or the limbic brain, and that's the seat of emotions and social behaviors. So anybody who has pets at home knows that those pets have feelings, and they also have the survival part of their brain, which leads them to the little bowl to eat and drink water. But then we became humans, and so we developed the third level, which is the neocortex, and that's where we have cognitive thought. And so intuitive eating encompasses all parts of the brain, and we like to look at it as an interplay of instinct, emotion, and thought. So, for example, if your instinct is to eat, but you're not really hungry, that's really the emotional part of the brain that's coming in to alter the instinct of hunger and fullness. And that's when we use the neocortex, or the cognitive part of the brain, to be able to come in and monitor and, advise us to make a choice that's best for us. For example, if you have a cold and your taste buds aren't working and you don't have an appetite, but you really need to eat, then you make sure that you eat something. Maybe you won't eat as much as you would if you had a great appetite, but you don't want to starve yourself because your body needs to heal. And so many people want to ignore the fact that emotions or illness can affect hunger and fullness, or the stress, and so many things take away appetite. And in working, I'm a certified eating disorder RD, and I'm working with people with eating disorders. When someone is healing from anorexia nervosa, that person's not really going to have very much hunger, and can't say to them, can't say, well, just eat when you're hungry, because, obviously the person's not going to eat very much, and it's both the instinct and the emotions are affected there. But if we're looking at someone who isn't suffering from an eating disorder and doesn't have, this dysregulated hunger and fullness, then sometimes there are going to be other factors that are going to affect hunger and fullness. So that's why I love this whole concept of the three parts of the brain, and why when people say to me, God, if I just ate whatever I wanted, I wouldn't stop eating this or that. Well, there was a child of one of my clients who said something like, well, I would just want to eat the whole cake. And fortunately, this client is really, she's really woke in terms of intuitive eating. And she said, well, go ahead and eat the whole cake. And then she said, but I would probably feel sick. Right. So there's many factors here to look at.
Sure. So earlier you mentioned the specific psychology around teens and all of us honoring our inner kid and inner teen. Tell us about what you mean by that, and then how that connects to intuitive eating.
So we all go through developmental stages. Erik Erikson was a psychologist who I think created that model of, I think it was called the 8 stages of man. Of course, today we would
have a problem with that.
We would. Maybe the 8 stages of human. And the first stage is trust, which I find to be very interesting, because that stage is what happens from the moment an infant is born, where the infant feels hunger and expresses that feeling through crying. And if there's an attuned caregiver who responds to that cry and feeds the infant, the infant learns at a psychic level that their signal is correct and starts to trust that their needs will be met. So that's the first developmental stage. The second one is autonomy, which actually starts to happen. They used to say it was age 2, but I've seen it in babies younger than that, where their favorite word is no, because from that moment on, they're working toward establishing that they are human beings on their own and they don't want to be told what to do. And of course, that goes throughout life, but it seems to be really powerful in those early years and then emerges again in a huge way in adolescence. So that need to assert autonomy is really one of the basic elements of intuitive eating, in that each person is the one who knows best in terms of hunger, fullness, what you like, how your body feels. And so intuitive eating is very appealing to someone in that developmental stage, because they're not being told this is good food, this is bad food, this is when, these are the times you should eat, this is how much you should eat. It's really in their hands to decide and to tune in to all of their own signals. So it's kind of a perfect fit for that autonomous piece. And then the reason I said this is for all of us is I think we all, we healthy adults are regularly striving for autonomy. We don't want to be told how to think or what to do. And we want to use our own wisdom to make decisions for ourselves. And that's what intuitive eating is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel deeply connected to my inner teen every weekend when I'm like, I just don't want to do my laundry again, but I have to.
Well, you see, what's so interesting about that is your emotional reaction is not feeling it, but then you use the cognitive part of your brain, your neocortex, to say, well, Janine, you don't have to do the laundry, but then you won't have any underwear to wear next week.
Right.
So, and
neocortex, really nice. A lifever.
Well, it's a really nice example and model for what I was saying in terms of the definition of intuitive eating, is that we get in touch with our emotions, we get in touch with our body's needs, but we also are in touch with our thoughts that help get us through life.
What do you think teens, or the part of us that's still a teen, really struggles with in being able to practice intuitive eating?
Well, first of all, there is so much out there in social media telling them that they should look a certain way. I think that's one of the biggest struggles, is they're seeing pictures of these perfect bodies. And I have that in quotes. If you saw me, I'd have my pictures in quotes. And they're feeling bad about themselves. They don't think that they match up. And so they try to alter their eating or their movement, their exercise, to try to change their body. So intuitive eating is not about changing your body. It's not about weight loss. It's not about building muscle. It's about feeling good and taking care of your needs. And so I think that would be one of the struggles, is how do they combat that focus in their lives? I think another struggle is there's so much orthorexia out there. And for your listeners who don't know what that means, unless you want to.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you want to summarize briefly, it's more helpful, I think, just to drop in the information as we go along in case somebody's listening to this episode as a one-off.
So orthorexia is basically trying to control your life, your health, by eating what's considered healthy. And unfortunately, it gets to an extreme where people are the opposite of healthy. And there's a lot of that out there: good foods, bad foods, the different diets. I just have to put something in that I read yesterday that just made me chuckle. There's so many people, they've gone through the paleo is the way to go, which has been scientifically proven to not be accurate. And now there's so many people on this keto thing. They go to ketosis. And the thing that I read yesterday that just made me, as I say, I just had this chuckle inside, was that apparently that people are women on the keto diets are now noticing that they're having vaginal odor. And
I read the same thing. Keto crotch, it's called. And I felt so sad.
Well, the reason I chuckled was that the response to that was trying to find some product to get rid of the odor. And to me, it was just eat a piece of bread. I mean, we need carbs to not be in ketosis. And in ketosis, people have an odor from their breath. And now women are finding it, as you say, the crotch odor. And so
it's so terrible. It's examples like that make me think, what is it going to take for everybody to realize diets are unhelpful and just, it's madness. Like when I read stuff like that, I'm just like, this is so extreme. I mean, if your pH is off enough that your body is responding in that way, please eat some carbohydrates. Oh my goodness.
Right. And so getting back to the orthorexia, you'll have people say, well, it's the healthiest way to go. Carbs are bad. We shouldn't eat carbs. You know, they went from we shouldn't eat gluten now to they shouldn't eat carbs. And this can lead one down a path of ill health, actually. And I have known about orthorexia for years and years, well before it was named, because I had a wonderful mother-in-law many, many years ago, may she rest in peace, who was orthorexic. And she would not put a bite of anything in her mouth that she didn't think was, you know, if it wasn't organic, if it wasn't in her, whatever she felt was healthy and not healthy. And that, of course, changes over time. And it really directed her life. But I think it came from a fear of losing people. She had deaths in her family, and maybe she could keep everybody alive by feeding them healthy. And she would get so upset if anybody in the family would eat something that she didn't think was healthy. The irony and the sad irony of this is many years later when she had dementia and she was living in a facility, she forgot all of her rules. And now she started eating all the food she never let herself eat. It was really, it was sad that she spent her entire life until her 80s not enjoying a lot of foods because she thought that they weren't healthy. So in any case, I think that there are so many families, especially here in California.
And in Colorado, where I am.
Okay, in Colorado, where they're on this, on these kicks. Dairy is bad, sugar is bad, everything is bad. And then these teenagers, getting back to your question, who really want to eat what they want to eat, and they're being told by their families that it's not okay. And that's something that can keep them from their intuitive eating as well. So you were asking what's the most difficult?
Yeah. And I empathize with teens when their bodies are changing through puberty and weight changes during that time. I just feel like, and the research shows us you're so vulnerable to dieting and eating disorders at that point. And I can understand why that's the response. And that was actually my personal response to that for a number of reasons too. But it just seems like intervening with teens would be so helpful to, at that point, to really support them in not adopting diet culture, diets, eating disorder behavior. Yeah.
As the research shows that little girls will gain approximately 25 pounds over a period of time as they're going into puberty in order to have enough fat on their bodies in order to be able to menstruate. And yet they start feeling bad about themselves. That's when they start calling themselves fat. What's worse about in these situations is often the parent, the mother especially, who's got her own issues, is worried about her daughter getting quote unquote fat and is starting to give her messages that she needs to watch what she's eating, restrict things and eat less and push exercise for the purpose of not gaining that weight. And there's a lot of little girls that actually delay menarche because they're not eating enough and they're worried about the weight that they're gaining.
Yes, fat phobia hurts everyone. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter anything else, doesn't matter what weight you're at. It's harmful to everybody.
Oh, yes. So
tell us about in the workbook. You mentioned there are some things that are different and arranged differently. And I would say the material it's intuitive eating, but I would say, because I have your workbook and I have the original book, of course, that it offers something different, even though it's the same and awesome intuitive eating stuff. So tell us what's different. What did you revise and what are we going to learn about?
Right. So the first chapter, of course, I wanted to go into the whole concept of diets and why they don't work and how harmful they are, because just to start with that. So that's where intuitive eating in the book and the workbook for quote unquote adults starts. But then I thought to myself, where do I want to go with these kids? What's going to appeal to them? And which also, of course, appeals to many of my clients. I put in the chapter on satisfaction right after, why diets don't work. And helping teens look at the possibility that they could really enjoy food, that they don't have to worry about what they should eat or what they shouldn't eat, but to really focus and stay present when they're eating so that they can get the most satisfaction and pleasure out of their eating. And so it goes through, of course, thinking about all the sensations that the body has around eating, all the pleasurable sensations, and then setting up an environment that is going to be as pleasurable as they can have it. And then also really looking at the foods they like to eat and figuring out whether they truly are foods that they're not allowing themselves to eat because they think they shouldn't, or if they eat them, do they really taste good to them? So going through what are the foods you really want to have. And then looking at, throughout the book, looking at how do you speak up for what you really need and combat what's out there, including family that tells you that you shouldn't be eating certain things or that you should finish your plate. So I went through that, and I wanted to get into looking at all the other aspects of intuitive eating through the lens of satisfaction. So then looking at hunger and fullness, not just kind of a rote, this is how you should, and I don't like the word should ever, but this is how you should start to eat when you're at this particular number, or this is where you should stop eating. It's more about, so how are you going to get the best satisfaction? At what level of hunger is going to give you the best satisfaction? Maybe if you're not hungry at all, and you start eating, you're not going to feel very satisfied because it just doesn't taste as good. And maybe if you're over hungry, you're in primal hunger, then you're going to have this primal need to just throw the food in your mouth, and that's not going to be very satisfying. So I'm using that chapter on satisfaction and bringing it through the rest of the book in many ways in terms of satisfaction. And also when I'm looking at the emotional eating chapter, having teens take a look at whether eating to comfort themselves, to numb their feelings, to distract themselves, really gives them satisfaction in the meal. And then another thing that goes through the whole book is staying present. Mm-hmm. And I'm very respectful to the whole concept of mindfulness and how important it is in keeping one in the present, and in terms of eating, just really enjoying the food. And when you're getting distracted by so many things that distract teens, to help them understand that it's best to bring themselves back to the present so that they can get that satisfaction.
Yeah, I loved it. And I do think the workbook does such a good job of talking about what do you do when your friends are talking about dieting or when your parents are pressuring you. And I thought that was really helpful. That was actually one of those instances where I was like, oh, my adult clients need this as well, don't we all? I loved seeing that part incorporated. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, I guess something I've noticed is a lot of people have so much fear around trusting themselves with intuitive eating. And I could imagine that in the teen years, maybe that fear is a little bit increased, especially on the part of like a parent or a caretaker, when maybe we think of teens as impulsive. I just feel like a lot of people tend to say around intuitive eating, kind of what you alluded to at the beginning of, well, if I let myself just eat whatever I wanted, I would just eat all the time and eat nonstop. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, again, so much about intuitive eating and about this book is about helping them learn that they do have this wisdom in them if they can just tap into it. And when they stop listening to everything else that doesn't really align with what they're needing and wanting, they're going to establish so much more trust in themselves in so many other aspects. I think for me, intuitive eating has always been not just about eating. It's just about being trusting one's inner wisdom, and it extends to so many other aspects of life. So that's one of the goals of the book, is to help them learn that it's okay to have their own feelings. It's okay to speak up. It's okay to be different than their friends. It's okay to be different than their parents. It's okay to speak for what they feel is really true within them.
Yeah, it's okay to set boundaries. That's very helpful and healthy.
Yeah, I have one exercise in there where they go to someone that they actually feel safe with and learn how to speak up about, what they need in terms of eating. And then if they can, use that as a way to go to someone who maybe isn't as safe around that, because there's so much self-silencing in the world of eating disorders, but also in the world, in the adolescent world. So they don't really speak up for what they feel, but there's a lot of acting out in other ways because their voice will be heard or honored or respected. So I think there'll be a lot less dangerous acting out when they start practicing talking about what they feel and what they believe and what's inside of them, their own internal wisdom.
Absolutely. For our listeners who are parents themselves, what would you offer to them about how they could support raising somebody as an intuitive eater?
Well, starting from the beginning. Well, let me tell you this. Actually, Evelyn and I, my co-author and I, have just signed a contract to write the 4th edition of Intuitive Eating, which it's now in its 3rd edition, and that'll be out next year. And I had written the chapter on raising kids and teens as intuitive eaters. And what I am adding to that chapter is something called baby-led weaning or baby-led solids, which is basically intuitive eating for babies. So right from the get-go, beyond, the listening to the hunger and fullness signals of an infant for drinking milk, when they are ready for solid foods, it's allowing them to lead the way. No spoon feeding, no pushing food on them that the doctor tells them they should eat. It's more of the child sitting with the family and watching the family eat and learning about social skills and learning about all different varieties of food and playing with the food and touching it and asking for it. So that begins intuitive eating, actually, at even 6 months old.
That's so interesting.
Yes, it's a whole concept that's actually been around for eons. I mean, they didn't have baby food back in primitive times.
Right.
They didn't have the bottles of pureed, mushed up food or those, the things that get me really are those pouches where they put so many things in the pouch and a child walks around all day just sucking on it. So it has been around forever, but there is more talk about it more currently and more people that are learning about it. And so I talk about it in this new chapter. And then there are a couple of books that people can buy. There's one, I don't even have it in front of me, but I will refer to it in the book. One, I think it's called Born to Eat by Leslie Schilling and her co-author. That is just great, just showing how natural it is for kids to lead the way, essentially. And this is where the autonomy piece begins early on. We're not trying to push food in you that you don't want, pick the foods that you really like. And then I think the most important part of starting a child on the path of intuitive eating is for family meals. And a family can just sometimes be one parent and one child because there are many families that are single parents. But eating with a child, having the child see the family eat a variety of foods. So it kind of, it's important for adults to take a look at whether they're offering themselves a wide variety of foods, and that the role modeling is so important for a child. So not having negative discussions at dinner time, sitting there and making a lovely environment where kids feel like they can eat what they want and as much as they want or as little as they want, and not be told that they need to eat more or they need to eat their vegetables before they can have their dessert, which I don't even like the word dessert, but, giving more power to a child, but trusting, and this goes back to the trust thing that we talked about before, that if a child is given a wide variety of foods early on, offered them, the family eats a wide variety of foods, that child is going to have a taste buds and a palate for many different foods. And if there's no rules put down about what you can't have or what you should have, that child ends up maintaining those intuitive eating signals, as I said, most of us are born with, and doesn't ever have problems. And I've seen this. What's so remarkable for me, I've been doing this work for a long time. I've been in private practice 37 years, and intuitive eating will be around 25 years coming next year. That's why we're doing this kind of anniversary edition as the 4th edition. And I have had such a wonderful opportunity to help my own clients get in tune with their own signals and normalize their eating and be in touch with what they like and satisfaction in eating. And then they have kids. I'm thinking in particular of one of my clients who's in her early 30s now. I met her when she was 16 and had anorexia, and she healed from her anorexia, and she stays in touch with me I'm kind of like a coach for her and helping her own kids eating. But she has 2 little kids now, one who's 3 or 4 and one's 4 and one's 1. And these 2 kids are amazing intuitive eaters, and she has really followed through with all of everything I have taught her. And her kids just are wonderful eaters, and they have some days they want a lot of watermelon, and some days they want a lot of chicken, and some days they want just a lot of M&Ms. But it all balances out.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think makes it so difficult to trust for people overall that it's gonna all balance out?
Well, again, all of this weight stigma, and we're told, and not just weight stigma, but also food myths. We're told that certain foods are bad for us. We're told that certain foods are good for us. We're told that we should eat a certain way. How can we trust? if we're being given that message, and for some people all their lives, and it goes down generation after generation. Another one of my clients happens to be pregnant right now, whom I met when she was 15 and had anorexia. Her mother has serious anorexia, and her grandmother has serious anorexia. And, so for generations of people who are not eating intuitively, and then one grows up not trusting. So it's a real reversal to help people learn how to trust, because most people are listening out there. Even really, really, really educated people are buying, drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say, or and buying into so much of this myth. And another nice thing about the fact that I've been doing this for so long is I've seen the trends go back and forth on their heads, whether it's dieting or whether it's actually the professional nutrition community that comes out and tells you fat is bad for you, then fat is good for you, then, low fat or saturated fat versus unsaturated fat. I mean, you can go crazy listening to all of these things, and the reversals really have to give you pause to think, well, who really does know? Isn't it more about listening to your body and ultimately having balance, because your body tells you that you feel better if you're eating in a balanced way.
Right. One of the things I'm thinking about too is I've had a lot of clients recently who have just talked about, it feels like it's going to take me so long to get to this point where I feel like I'm actually practicing intuitive eating. I was wondering if you would offer your thoughts on that too, and how learning to practice intuitive eating is really a process, and why it's necessary for it to take time.
Well, there's a couple of things that I want to say about that. I have this model that I drew one day, just whipped it up, and I'm not a great artist. I call it the spiral of healing, and it's actually in the Intuitive Eating Workbook. There's a graph of that, and it really just kind of looks like a spring, and where I tell people the momentum is always upward and onward, and there are going to be these moments when, if you think about a spring, how it comes back on itself, and there's like a little loop along the way. And I said that those loops are the opportunities to learn when you're not doing it, again, perfectly, where people think that they should do intuitive eating perfectly and they're not doing it right and it's taking them too long. So no, it's a learning experience. If you're coming from a place of curiosity versus judgment, which is one of my favorite sayings, and you understand, for example, let's say your intention is to eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full, and you find that you came away from a meal so full that you were uncomfortable. Most people have been trained to blame themselves and feel shame and frustration because they ate too much. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as, wow, okay, this is interesting. So you came away from that meal and you weren't feeling very comfortable. Let's just take a look at it. Or maybe you didn't eat for many, many hours before you started the meal. So you were so much in primal hunger that you couldn't stop eating. Or maybe you had some old diet thoughts that came up and you were telling yourself that carbs are bad, but what you really wanted was spaghetti. And then you ate the entire bowl that was huge and felt too full because you were thinking, I shouldn't be eating this at all. And, so that's an old diet thought that flew in. Or maybe you were just needing extra comfort. And let's come from a place of compassion. By the way, compassion is a huge piece of intuitive eating, is really, understanding that we're human and that we have feelings, and feelings affect our moods and our appetites and the way we cope. And so when people will let go of thinking they've got to do this right, and as you're saying, as your question was, it's going to take a long time. Well, how great. And as you actually implied, it gives you an opportunity to learn more about yourself and what your true needs are and your feelings along the way. And as long as people can stop being negative toward themselves. The two words that I hear most in my office are, I felt so guilty for what I did, or I feel so much shame. I had 3 candy bars and I feel shame. And there's helping people take out that morality from eating and really just be compassionate toward the fact that maybe they needed 3 candy bars right then, or maybe they weren't taking care of themselves. Self-care is another big piece of it. And I do a lot of that in the teen book also, is talking about all the aspects of self-care. Maybe they were extra sleepy and so they got hungrier. It's mainly really stop judging and look at it as opportunity. Opportunity. Every time something doesn't go quite the way you think you'd like it to, say, wow, this is great. This is an opportunity for me to learn more about myself and what my needs are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always tell people, if it were easy, you would have already done it by now. And the fact that it's taking time is because it needs to. So ease up on yourself. I love what you said, though, about compassion and emotional eating. And one of the things that just really frustrates me is how emotional eating is pathologized. And I know that ultimately we were trying to get away from using food as your primary or your only way of dealing with emotions. But to me, the idea that eating and emotions are and can be completely or should be completely separated is absolutely absurd. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on emotional eating. I'm air quoting here.
100%. Well, first of all, an infant is born, and as soon as it's all cleaned up, it's given milk. Whether it's put on the breast or eventually, a little bit afterwards, it's given a bottle. I mean, what is that infant taught? Taught that food is comforting. So it's inborn in us that food is comforting, and so why should we make that a bad thing? And in terms of the whole range of emotions, I mean, pleasure and satisfaction are emotional. And so joy and emotion and satisfaction are emotional eating. So again, why would that be a negative? I think that people want to or need to acknowledge that sometimes they are going to want to comfort themselves with food. And sometimes it's just eating the foods that are comforting versus eating more food than their bodies tell them that they need. That's enough emotional comfort just by eating the foods that they really love. Or sometimes they need to eat more food and just not to beat themselves up. And again, to be able to say, wow, I was needing comfort. And maybe I'll look, because I don't feel so well now that I ate the whole cake, as I was talking about before, maybe I'll look at some other ways I can learn how to comfort myself, but not to feel that food should not be part of emotions.
Right. And I also think that there's such a broad range, and that when people are eating for emotional reasons too, I think people automatically associate that with like physical discomfort or that sort of thing. And the example that's coming to mind is last weekend, it was actually freezing here in Denver. It was so cold. It was completely snowy. I was cooped up in my house, and I was like, you know what I want? I really want hot chocolate. Is that because I need anything in terms of nutritional value from hot chocolate? No, it's because it sounded really comforting and appropriate, and that was perfectly satisfying. And so that's emotional eating too.
Sure. And I really hope that people don't, every time they make a choice of eating, think what's the most nutritionally, food, because wow, that would really take the pleasure away from eating. Absolutely. So that may have been emotional eating for you in terms of comforting you in that cold. And how great is that? Right?
Yeah, you need it sometimes. It gets really cold occasionally here, at least by my standards. I'm sure there are people listening to this podcast who are living much colder places than I am, but that aside.
Exactly.
So in closing for today, any things that you want to offer as hope or pieces of advice for people who are on their intuitive eating journey, especially teens themselves or people who are parenting teens or supporting teens in their intuitive eating journey?
Well, I think the key words here are autonomy, understanding if you're the parent of a teen that there's very little that a teenager has say over in their life. I mean, often they've got so many rules while they're teenagers. How wonderful is it to help them see that they have autonomy over their eating, that nobody's going to tell them what they should eat or shouldn't eat, and to honor and respect this need for all of us to strive for autonomy. So that would be one of the keywords. And the other keyword would be satisfaction. Again, if you put that as your framework, it's going to make helping you get back to that innate intuitive eater so much easier. I mean, I can just see light bulbs go off in people's heads as they think of it from that standpoint. It really does help them become more attuned to hunger and fullness and how to deal with emotions when they're thinking about the satisfaction part. Well, I would say those would be the two things to take home from that. And also, I mean, the big thing is to really challenge our diet culture and challenge the messages that we're getting that we should look a certain way, that, helping people understand that we all come in different sizes and shapes and heights and eye color and hair and color and all the different things that we come, skin color, and we're all wonderful. And so helping teenagers really appreciate themselves for all that they are, not their size or shape.
All bodies are good bodies.
All bodies are good bodies. Exactly.
Well, of course, I'm going to link to your intuitive eating workbook for teens in the show notes so people can find it just like usual. I'm sure available wherever books are sold. I will link to it on Amazon. I don't know, Elyse, if you're allowed to share a little bit more about the next edition of Intuitive Eating that's coming out next year, about the piece that you and Evelyn are adding in. Are you allowed to share about that?
Yes, I'm going to say something about it. And I'd like everyone who hears this to understand that the first Intuitive Eating book was written in 1993 and 94, coming out in 1995. Our consciousness was not raised then as it is now in terms of health at every size. And I mean, we were definitely focused on how diets were harmful, but we have evolved, as we all hope to evolve over the years, to just understand the insidious nature of diet culture, our implicit biases. And so we really want to bring this fourth edition up to par in terms of helping people look at health at every size rather than the idea that weight needs to change. In the very earliest edition, it was, well, you'll get to your natural weight, just by intuitive eating, which put a focus on weight loss. And we are kind of both horrified when we look back at the original book, which, by the way, the second edition was just the original book with just the chapter that was written on eating disorders. So the third edition, we really attempted to do this, and that was written in 2010 and 11. And so now we're 9 years past that. So it's really wonderful for us to all honor how much we evolve in so many ways. So the new edition will have even more sensitivity to what I'm talking about, because there are a lot of people who have said, well, I love the book, but there's some things that are triggers in there. And we agree. And so we want to take that all out.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. I've only been doing the podcast. It'll be a little over 3 years now at the time that this is being recorded. And I have that sense just about my podcast. And so I can only imagine what that's like. And it's really amazing to see somebody like you, who is a leader in our field, to be so honest and also humble about how you've grown and changed and you're continuing to do better. And I think that's such a wonderful model for the rest of us professionals, especially, who are also trying to do the same thing, because we all are learning and getting more information and doing better so we can be better for the clients that we're trying to help.
Right. And to help us not feel shame and help our clients not feel shame. When you don't know what you don't know, how can you feel shame about what you didn't know? As
Yes.
I'm saying, 25 years ago. And so it's more about honoring open-mindedness and a willingness to shift. And rather than beating yourself up for the way it was before, it's moving forward and being grateful that you can be, I used this word before, and I think it's now passé, but woke. I listen to some of my teenage clients, but sometimes by the time I catch something, it's no longer as popular. But in any case, I think it's so important for us to do that. I will also say something. When I started writing the teen book, I thought to myself, I really have to make sure that I'm speaking to boys as well as girls. And then all of a sudden it hit me. It's like, whoa, people are on all, the gender spectrum. This is for everyone. And it's not binary. It's not just girls and boys. And this is something I wouldn't have thought of if I'd written that book 10 years ago. So yeah, we're growing all the time.
We all are. Yep. I love it. Elyse, thank you so much for taking the time. You're incredibly busy in general. You have a book launch coming out. I really appreciate it. Everybody, you absolutely need this workbook. I don't think it matters what age you're at, but especially if you're a teenager, you're a clinician who works with teenagers and their families, definitely incredibly useful. I loved it. I found so much new stuff in it, even though I've read Intuitive Eating like a million times and the Intuitive Eating Workbook too. So I recommend that without any reservation. It's awesome. And I will link to it in the show notes as usual. Elyse, thank you so much. I so appreciate you.
Thank you, Janine. I appreciate you so much as well, and I appreciate this opportunity. So thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode. Let's keep in touch. You can find all the information you need about the podcast at eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com, including full podcast episodes and links to all of our social media sites. You can join our Facebook group for the podcast by searching Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast on Facebook. This is a closed group for listeners of the podcast looking to connect, share resources, and get involved in a pro-recovery community. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing. Talk to you next time on the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.